Yeah, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Yeah, welcome to already the 10th edition of China Creates. And today we talk about the urban transformation of Shenzhen in China. Um, as you know, China has built a nice track record of ultra fast urbanization in the past 40 years or so. And city authorities have mainly focused on quantity. But now they're making the transformation. Now they are more and more focusing on the quality of the urban design. And in many cases, that means urban transformation to achieve a healthy city, a city that's accessible, that has greens, and so forth. Now, of course, the Netherlands has got a track record on urban transformations. And the question is, can Dutch knowledge inspire Chinese cities? But also the other way around. Can the experience of Chinese urban developers inspire Dutch urban design? That's what we're going to talk about. My name is Michiel Hulshoff. My connection to China is that I used to be a China correspondent for Vrij Nederland. And I have a big interest in fast-growing cities. So in that case, I was right to go to China. And I will moderate today's evening. But before I tell you what we're going to do tonight exactly, I want to know who's in the room. That's nice for the speakers to know. So let me ask you, who of you has a job or is studying something related to architecture or urban design? Okay, so half of the audience. And who of you actually comes from China? Who is Chinese? So we have 1, 2, yeah, 6. Where are you from? Where in China?
I'm from northeast of China.
Harbin or where?
That's too much in the north. I'm from a city called Dalian, not far away from South Korea and North Korea.
Okay, and in Dalian, do you also see what I was just explaining? A big growth and now focus more on improving the quality of the city?
Uh, sorry, I actually don't know because I've been away from home for like 5 years already. So I can't tell you if we're having this shift in my hometown.
So you see, the development goes so fast that 5 years is like a life. Where you're from?
Yeah, I'm actually from the middle part of China, Henan province. I don't know if you know that. Yeah, but I know Shenzhen. That I've worked in the rep office in Europe of the Shenzhen government in Brussels in the past. So that's why it's interesting for me.
Okay, good. Welcome. Okay, so who of you has been to China? Who's not Chinese but has visited China? So most of you? Well, 3/4, let's say, yeah. Who of you has worked in China or worked with a Chinese company? That's less. And who of you has the ambition to work in China, but has not worked yet? So that's interesting. So let's ask him. Yeah. So tell me.
Well, I'm hoping to work at the Dutch embassy from coming summer.
Okay. Good. From coming summer. Yes. And so in Beijing or? Yes. Okay. And you?
Same story.
So you're going together to Beijing. Nice. Welcome. Okay, so we have a lot of specialists in the room that know more than I do about the topic, which is why I'm not one of the speakers. So I will introduce to you the first speaker now. She will give the keynote lecture. She's actually the reason that we have tonight's night. She studied both architecture at the University of Delft as Mandarin Chinese at the University of Leiden. And this unique combination of studies made her very interesting, of course, for many urban design companies that want to spread their business in China. We actually worked together on a project 5 years ago, but then she was bought away from by MLA Plus, where she became the China representative, and I believe she's now working on projects in other countries as well. Please give her a warm welcome, Brechtje Spreeuwers.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Michiel. Before I start, actually, I would like to tell a short story out of practice. Because we were doing a regeneration project in Shenzhen, in Luohu district. And it was a really difficult site, actually. It was a complex location with a lot of different landowners, developers, and a lot of people involved. So at a certain point, we thought, okay, let's maybe have a workshop, because we do that in the Netherlands, of course, quite often. So we proposed that to Mr. Wang, the chief of the redevelopment bureau of Luohu district. And we proposed quite casually, okay, let's have a workshop. And then you should have seen his face, because he got completely silent. You saw the fear in his eyes. And then he said, after a short silence, he said, yes, but then in a workshop, people are going to express their opinions. And I was really scared of that. And then we said, yeah, of course. That's the reason why we have a workshop, right? Why would we otherwise have a workshop with stakeholders? But he was really scared of that. But in the end, actually, he agreed to the workshop. So he was really brave in that sense. And we had a really successful workshop. So all the stakeholders were there from the site. All developers were there. And people really started to talk with each other. So one developer said to the other, for example, oh, your plot is next to mine. Maybe we can combine the green ratio, and then we have one big park. So we have more quality in the site. So it was really successful. And now every time we come there, you ask us to have another workshop. So that's the other side of the story. Now he only wants workshop. But that's the other side. But what this story actually tells us, I think, is that something that is really normal in the Netherlands, so just to have a workshop with stakeholders, is still quite new in Shenzhen or in China, and actually it really helped this process and this project, because in the end it was really it was a successful regeneration project. So I think that's also what I wrote there. There's kind of a need of transformation, of knowledge about transformation in Shenzhen, and of course in the Netherlands we have a lot of knowledge. And we're also busy with that. We're still developing, because I looked a bit on the internet. There are lots of congresses about transformation and even more. The government is busy with it, also with transformation. And we even have a manifest about transformation. So there's a lot of knowledge building up in the Netherlands. So that was actually the reason why I initiated this research. So what can we learn from each other? How can we connect actually the supply with the demand? And then with the question, so what is happening there at the moment on the area of transformation, and how can the Dutch industry respond to that, and what can we learn from each other? Let's combine the forces. So before then, my name is Brechtje Spreeuwers. Michiel already explained a bit. I'm an architect and a sinologist. So I studied in Leiden and Delft. And the last couple of years, I flew almost every month to China for getting new projects, to manage current projects, and to build up our network there. And I'm also interested in research. So before I researched also urban villages, and now this research actually. And MLA Plus is a big architecture and urban planning firm with a lot of offices around the globe. So we also have our headquarters in Rotterdam, but we also have now offices in Shenzhen as well, and in Shanghai, for example. And the range is quite big, from architecture, also built projects here in Amsterdam, and to urban planning and big regeneration projects. So let's get started. What's happening in Shenzhen actually at the moment? So I think a lot of people already know about Shenzhen. I think it's a well-known story, from the Fishers village to the metropole, from 30,000 inhabitants to 11 million. So that's quite well known. Less known is actually now the regional development. So from focusing only on Shenzhen as a city to look at more bigger, Shenzhen is, I think this one is here, to focusing also on the whole region actually, of combining all these cities, and for example also Hong Kong. And that actually all started in the 80s, when Shenzhen became the first special economic zone of China, and also one of the first cities to reform and open up. And that is actually the reason that Shenzhen now, as also one of the first cities in China, really has to deal with a large housing stock of the 80s and the 90s, which are actually too young to demolish, but also a bit too old to fit the modern world. And although too young to demolish, I also have we have a lot of clients, of course. And once I spoke to a client, and then he said, "Yeah, in our area, there are really, really old buildings." So then I said, "Okay, how old are they?" I thought Tang Dynasty or Qing Dynasty, I don't know. And then he said, they're 12 years old. Wow, it's really old. So he said, "Oh, no, yeah, maybe we have to keep them. We have to look at it." So that's also a different perspective, of course. But the fact is that there is a large housing stock from the 80s and the 90s that needs some transformation. And another issue is that at the moment there's actually a lack of large pieces of land. So also the Shenzhen gets full, and there are only small plots left, which are of course far more complex than to have a greenfield or a brownfield of greenfield development. And the last thing is that there's now a renewed focus actually on living quality. So residents, after the growth of the last years, residents now demand a higher quality of life. And all these three aspects actually led to the fact that Shenzhen is already, in China also, a front runner on urban regeneration. So they're already, since 2009, they're busy with it. They have a plan, construction land, they have a plan of what to develop, and they have really big ambitions for the future. So I think that's good to understand, because I think in Holland there are still a lot of people who think that Chinese cities are kind of lagging behind also in acknowledging the problems. But that's not the fact. Shenzhen really knows what to do. They have the plans. The only question is, of course, how to do it. And that's what they are facing now on the area of transformation. So before then we can go to the transformation story, we also need to know a bit more about how the Chinese land market is organized. And before the 80s, it was pretty simple. Everything was from the state, from the government. And then after the reform and opening up, also the land and housing market actually got reformed. So simply said, there are now three types of rights. You have the ownership right, and that's from the government. The government, in the city at least, owns all the land. Then you have the land use rights. So you have the right then to use the land. It's kind of it's leasing, kind of what we have here in Amsterdam as well, erfpacht. So you can use the land for a certain amount of time. And finally, we have the property ownership rights. So you can be the owner of the building, of the bricks. So in China, if you buy a house, the bricks are yours because you have these bricks on that piece of land. The land underneath is you can use to have these bricks, and all the other land is from the government. So then you can also, I think a lot of people also know that you can have these well-known nail houses that owner owns his house, so he owns the bricks actually and the land underneath it. So he didn't want to move for the highway, but the government owns all the other land surrounding it, so they decided to use that right and to build the highway anyway. But then you can see how that works actually. Then it's also good to understand that the land market in China is actually a big business for local governments. So that's also important for transformation. That transformation is not only a tool to achieve better quality, but also business. And that comes actually because after the 80s, local governments could also, these land use rights, so the right to use the land, they could trade commercially to all kinds of parties. And since in China there's no property tax, not yet at least, so they're busy with it always. So after the land is sold or the land use rights are sold, the government cannot own any money anymore from the housing. So that leads to the fact that local governments got really dependent on this land transfer fee. So they got really dependent on transferring the rights of the land. So that was actually an incentive to transfer a lot of rights, and then the real estate boom was actually a fact. So a lot of houses got built. So that was because the government really actually now needs to sell this land use rights for their local revenue. So how does transformation now work in Shenzhen? I made a diagram, a simplified diagram, but don't panic. Because I will explain it, and it won't take too long. So please relax. What it shows, and that's actually the most important thing, what it shows, of course, is that the development process is going from top to down. So that's actually the most important thing. It starts with the Ministry of National Land Resources. They make actually the big 5-year plans and the land quota for the city, so in general. Then it goes to the local government, in this sense Shenzhen. the local government asks primary developers, so they appoint a so-called primary developer to kind of, they call it cook the land, so to make it ready for development. And it also means arranging compensation for the current house owners. After that, it goes to the local planning authority, and they actually make the plan where they allocate all the functions and set the density per plot based on actually the land quota of the Ministry of National Land Resources. After that, it goes to a secondary developer who can be private or state-owned. And then the design part comes into being, because then a local design institute or a design firm, they can actually start with making a master plan of a certain plot, which then is, it can be a master plan, which is a big scale, so it's really a quantitative scale. Then it needs permission from the local planning authority to continue. So then it goes to the urban design, which is more based on quality, actually, which defines the quality of the site. And the final step is the detailed design after it's get approved. And detailed design is really the preparation for implementation, actually. So then, we know then that is really top down. And then, of course, that really conflicts with transformation. Because a 2D top-down model does not really fit the complex reality that you have on the ground in an existing city. So that's the conflict there is at the moment. And an example of that was when we were working also in Shenzhen on a Dayun town and urban design there. And we had really large discussions about this road here. Because in the master plan, so in the scale really up, it was stated that road should be there. But then, we said, this road, it really cuts our park. We designed the park, and there should be a park there. We designed it, and it really cuts our park into two. And also, if we look at this site, it doesn't need to be a road there because there are enough roads surrounding it. So then we worked together with that on the local with the local design institute. And then we had to go back to the local planning authority, to the transport of the infrastructure department of the government. And they came with, I'm not kidding, with really like Word documents from the 90s, with tables that stated, a city with this and this size should have that amount of roads. And so this district is that and that and that size, with that kind of inhabitants, so it should have this amount of roads. And then we were like, but you see this road, it's not really adding to the quality. But then they said, no, it's in the tables, it should be there. So that was really like the problem. That was really a discussion between qualitative and quantitative arguments, and also in this model actually. In the end, we did have a kind of Dutch polder solution, because we made the road. We said we thought of it with a trick together with the local design institute, so they were on our hand. We made the road non-compulsory. So we made it, but we said it's non-compulsory, so the constructor in the end can decide if he wants to build it or not, which of course costs extra money, so he would not do it. So it was in the end we had a solution for it. That's the way how to deal with it. But it really showed this quantitative qualitative difference actually. So then for Dutch designers, then where they can contribute in this process is actually mostly to work together with the local design institute. Because they know the site the best, they know the local situation the best. And so if you as a Dutch designer work with them, you can really add, you can both have benefits of it actually, because they know the site the best and you know the more new methods and new tools actually. And then especially on the master plan and the urban design skill. So then an LDI we work together with often is CAUPT. It's a China Academy of Urban Planning and Design. They have a headquarters in Beijing, but they're all over China. And their Shenzhen local branch is really active also in the transformation. So we do a lot of urban transformation projects with them. And then because it's Chinese New Year, Zhou Jun could not come. But he made a little presentation where he actually explains the transformation trends in Shenzhen at the moment. And yeah, it's 5 or 6 minutes. And I say that because it's not only the content that shows how transformation works, but also kind of the form of the presentation, how he's giving the presentation. So, and also for the Chinese speaking person, it was a bit too long, the presentation. So we cut the Chinese parts, but the English is still quite integral what he's saying. But for the Chinese people, they might miss some parts. So you have to look at the English part.
好，新年好，我来给大家来介绍一下深圳市的城市更新的规划的新趋势。深圳市呢，中国的深圳市呢，在城市人口不仅是在规模增加到了现在大概2000万人左右，而且在结构上不断的改善。那么在早期的时候，城市更新主要是针对的是零星地块，零星的像旧村地块，那么强调的是散点的地块更新。更新的目的仅仅只是考虑一些经济效益，因为在这个阶段，城市的经济的投资主要依赖于城市更新，公共设施、学校、医院的改善也是依赖于城市更新。那么城市的公共交通、公共住房的提供也是非常大程度上依赖城市更新。那么经过这个挑战有主要的是3个趋势。一个呢是从早期粗放的散点式的改造向整体的专门化的改造方向转变。第二个呢是由追逐个体的经济利益向实现城市整体的和谐发展的转变。第三个呢，我们认为是由传统的空间规划面向光体协商互动的格局已初步形成。我们整个片区，那么比如像我们在宝安区做的这个项目，就会要求我们划定6到7个平方公里来进行统筹研究解决系统性的问题，强化这个地区的历史文化、生态保护等在城市更新中的控制作用。那么我们也在这样的大框架里面来完成城市尺度的公共交通以及慢行系统的研究。那么在这基础上，我们形成了城市设计的总体上6个平方公里城市设计的框架。那么在这个框架里面，确定了生态的结构、交通的结构，以及我们城市更新各个项目彼此之间的关系。第二个变化的挑战是，政府会越来越多的鼓励和引导市场进行单元式的统筹更新。那么在较大范围内推动城市的更新，这样一方面政府可以更有效的提供公共产品，市场和开发商呢享有更多健康的经济上的发展机会，那么周边的民众或者是本项目里的民众可以更有效的参与规划，因为它可以更有效的提供公共设施。那么在这个范围里面，我们通过我们的拆除重建，我们就主要提供了3个9年制的学校。第3个变化的趋势，我们认为还是以这个项目为例。在设计中，我们更强调建筑功能的混合，那么以满足不同人群的需求，保证多样性的场所魅力。那么整个白石洲项目45万平米的用地，我们整个规划计容的开发量是347万平米。那么其中我们包括了就多种多样的一些功能区、商业、地下商业、办公、酒店以及公寓、住宅、学校以及等等一些其他的一些设施，更多强调的建筑功能的多样混合。第4个呢，我们认为这个最重要的在设计领域里面，就是如何面对深圳市超高密度的城市建成环境，来在各个系统里面去研究我们超高密度的城市建成环境。那么在这样的一个超高密度的城市里面，我们需要研究的是多层次的开放的步行空间系统。那么所有的城市设计的环节里面非常强调我们立体城市的设计。那么在立体城市里面，不仅解决楼与楼之间的连接，也能解决我们不同时段的办公人群或者是住宅人群对公共空间的不同的使用方式。最后一个方面呢，就是我们也认为，就是在超高密度城市里面，我们非常关注新技术的应用。 以应对我们不同的一些适应性的研究、适应性的设计。比如我们现在的海绵城市，那么根据国家和深圳市海绵城市建设目标，我们会制定我们每一个项目里面的我们不同的海绵城市的设计准则。那么在这个项目里面，我们可能会提出我们不同的通风、雨水管理、渔湖管理以及我们的收集方式和蓄水再利用的一些方式。另外一个呢，在深圳市，我们还有非常关注的是智慧城区的管理平台建设。那么主要研究方向可能是主要针对智能的交通、物理环境、防灾、城市服务方面，能实现这个智能的一些使用方式。对出现的一些情况，我们进行一个总结，就城市更新越来越多的包括除了一些公共利益和公共政策的关注点外，在技术层面，我们越来越关注像海绵配套设施以及我们智慧城区综合防灾以及环境一些评估的方向的一些关注点。好，我们针对深圳市城市更新的介绍就这些，因为准备的非常仓促希望大家包涵，谢谢。
So that gave kind of an introduction on what an LDI thinks of the transformation trends in Shenzhen, and I think what we learned and what you also see in this movie actually is that themes like, for example, integrated planning or to have workshops or all these tools that we use actually are still not really well known in Shenzhen, but they're really busy with it. So I think we could really tap into that market actually, in that way that we can learn from each other. Then always the next question is, people always ask me, yeah, but what can we learn from Shenzhen or from China? And I think actually a lot of people are really criticizing those, for example, 5-year plans from the ministry or 10 years plans. But I think a good point of that is, especially in the transformation process, is that it really shows a long-term vision, independent of changes in governments or in local governments, because the government is always the same. And here in the Netherlands, of course, we have every couple of years we have a change of government, which kind of interrupts the planning then again. So the long-term vision of the government, if you like it or not, if you can also disagree, of course, to that vision, then you have a problem because it will be executed anyway in the years that come. So, but it also has its advantages because it really, shows that you can have a vision and implement that, and especially, for example, in terms of sustainability, the government can really do something. And so this top-down process, I think also some people in the Netherlands would kind of do a murder for this quick 2D top-down process. I'm not saying that is an advantage, but I think some people would like that instead of all the, of course, bewonersavonden and participatie and all that kind of stuff. But that's, of course, that's not the main thing. I think the main advantage that we can learn from Shenzhen is that they often have the long-term vision. So that was my message for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brechtje Spreeuwers. Stay here because people might have some questions. I have a question first.
Yeah.
When I look at the presentation, and especially also the presentation of Jun, he was saying things that reminded me of sort of in the 50s.
Yeah.
In Europe, you had this post-war architecture, building fast, big quantities, and then you had a discussion afterwards. Okay, so how should we improve the quality? How can we redesign? Is it similar somehow or not?
At one point, it is similar, I think, because you see, you see the outcome is kind of the same. So you think they're more behind, you could say in that way. But on the other side, I think there's a lot of knowledge developing now at the moment. But there are really clever people busy with it. Also, this Joe Jun is also busy with it, of course, how to tackle this. But then the system is so rigid and is so 2D actually and top down that it's kind of impossible to execute all the ideas that are already there. And that we often have that. And then that's also how sometimes we as a designer can influence it a bit, also because we are foreign. We can say, for example, to this Mr. Wang, let's have a workshop. And if a Chinese company would have said it to him, they would say, no, of course not. Are you crazy? But because we said that, he said, no, yeah, okay, now yeah, let's give it a shot. Otherwise, it's are just the white and the people, the foreigners who did it.
Yeah. So is it maybe that's your main function, to be the outsider?
Yeah, yeah, and that's
As a
yeah, get to look with a refreshed vision to it. But on the other side, be the outsider, but also know, of course, how it works also in China. Because if we want to have our Dutch model into China, that's not going to work, I think.
Yeah.
So for example, what I said with this Diu New Town, that you have this kind of polder model. So you know how it works in China, you know how the institutes work, and then you have this kind of solution.
Yeah, but then you also have a disadvantage, of course, because you're not a Chinese company.
Yeah.
So this is a completely different situation. You have a different political system,
Yeah.
a different scale, different everything. Is it not? Yeah.
So we are also not proposing, for example, revolution.
Yeah.
But we are proposing just small steps. Maybe on a really small scale, change something or benefit it a bit, and then you can expand it.
Okay. Let's look at the room. Who has a question? Yeah. Wait until I'm with you. Yeah.
Hi. Can I? I'm very fascinated by the last part that you mentioned, that you think the Chinese government generally have a long-term vision. But my friends who is currently working in a government office, and our personal chat is, she complained about, like, because all the mayor, let's say, or high rank officer, they often like rotate it pretty frequently.
Yeah.
So they somehow just say, well, I'm new to the office and I'm not gonna continue the previous project. I'm gonna start a new one. So she complained like that's like such a waste of money, and it happens so often. So I kind of wonder. I assume what you're saying is a different layer of thing, but I wonder how do you see like this true aspect of reality?
Yeah, that's a real problem, I think. Yeah.
How often does Shenzhen get a new mayor? Every couple of years, I believe, right? Or not? Yeah. Yeah.
Last year there was a new one, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other one I met. Yeah.
So the question is, well, there's long-term planning, but in
Yeah.
reality, they change plans every so and so years.
Yeah, that's a real problem, and I think that's also the difference that you see between central government and local governments. So that's really there's a big difference between those two entities, actually. And then again, there's a big difference between local government and the execution. So yeah, and it's with the mayors, I completely agree, and also because they get how do you say that, they get evaluated on the GDP of their city, for example, and also on the transfer, actually also on their revenues. So they're actually really forced to transfer as much land use rights as possible.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. This first one.
Yeah, the transformation, that also needs a lot of critical thinking, and that is not what is general practice really in China. But the transformation is going quickly. How do you experiencing the change in critical thinking?
The change in critical thinking in transformation? Yeah. I think that was also the reason to start up this research. When I started working in China 5 years ago, there was not a lot of people were talking about transformation. Not a lot of local design institutes were talking about it. But then 2 years ago, I think it started that, for example, this Kaupt, the head of Kaupt, asked us at one moment, he asked us, how do you do that in the Netherlands, actually? Because every city in the Netherlands is old. How do you do that? Help us, please, teach us. So that was a kind of difference, I think, between only focusing on really growth and then these persons that are asking these questions to us. And that really fascinates me, actually. And also because I also thought it's more the big picture that the cities want to grow. But then there are really clever people, head of local design institutes, who are asking these questions. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a local. So there's one more question over there. Yeah. There you go.
Well, it's kind of a 2-part question.
Oh,
That's
okay.
okay.
So do the first part.
Okay. So you mentioned there's both private and state-owned development companies.
Yeah.
How do the private companies actually compete against the state-owned companies? Like, how's that selection process? And the second part, very quick.
No, wait. Let's first answer this. Yeah.
I have to say, private companies in China are often not always private, but they're partly private and partly state-owned. So they anyway have their connections in the government to get projects.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Second part.
I was just going to ask if there's a difference in quality between the private and state-owned developers?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially if you talk on architecture, actually. So on architecture, there's a lot more freedom if you have a private developer, and there's also much more design fee if you work for a private developer than for a state-owned developer. On the other side, the really big projects often go to the state-owned developer. So. Yeah, and you can get them. You can you meet them in different projects actually. So.
I see there's one last question, right? Quickly, because we have to move on.
It's actually not a question. It's just an answer.
That's good. Yeah.
Because the guy over there, he just asked about how private companies can compete with the state-owned companies. My dad, he owns a construction company in China, so we're a private company. Very often it's the case that when you have a mass project going on, and we will have the state-owned company taking over it, and then they will sublet the contract to private companies. So the mass plan is not designed by the private companies. We're just doing the last few pieces. We get the smallest profit, and we don't have any sayings in this. But that's just how it works in my hometown.
Okay, so that's how it really works, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for giving this introduction to us. Brechtje Spreeuwers. So actually, she was asking the question: How do you do this in the Netherlands? Was the question that that Brechtje got in Shenzhen. Well, the second speaker knows all about that. So we're going to listen. How is what you would call the modus operandi for urban transformation in the Netherlands? And we have an expert on this topic. He worked on multiple projects for Arab and AM Grondbedrijf, and he's currently a location manager for BPD Urban Development, working on a redevelopment project of a former military base in Utrecht that he's going to explain all about to us. Give him a warm welcome, Jeroen Hutte.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Jeroen Hutte, working at BPD. Not everybody is already used to the name. It's the former Bouwfonds, so most people know that one. This is my first slide, and actually there's not very much special on it. Well, actually there is, and I'm going to tell you about this in a second. So let's continue. I'm going to talk on a case which is in Utrecht. It's the former military base, which sounds like very cool, but they stored the uniforms here, so it's a bit less cool than the introduction states. It's along the canal. It's 15 minutes walk from the station, so it's very close to the city center. And this is a picture of before. If you go there now, it's just one flat field of sand, and there was a lot of hangars there. And actually the whole area is going to be transformed in the future. So we are the first one, and after us there's will be adjacent developments. And here there will be 600 dwellings to be developed by BPD, the company I'm working for. I will show you some pictures of what we would like the end result to be. And I was asked to highlight the process of how we got here. And I'm only the messenger. I joined the ranks of BPD like September the 1st, and before that a lot of work was already put into this project by former colleagues and also by SVP, and they did something very valuable for an urban planner, because they didn't start with an urban plan, they started with this. And I think this was really a good move. They said, what do we want to be? What will be the principles for this location? And they said, we want to have a healthy city. We want to have a healthy development, which is also what the municipality would like. Utrecht is the city saying we are going to do healthy urban development. Well, that's actually really smart. They didn't tell anyone how to do it. They only said we are going to be a healthy urban city. And then all the developers came in and they said, okay, we're going to contribute to the healthy urban city theme. So this is one way in loading those healthy urban living policies of the municipality. So we say we want to be a connected city. We want to be a layered city, and this is not only layered like vertically in space, but also in time. Before it was a defense terrain, it was like a gardening terrain, and it was 120 years old, and there's still a monument there reminding us of this past. So we also wanted to have these layers into our urban plan. We want to be resilient, playful, and we want to be an inclusive city, so where multiple people can meet and work and share and live. So how did we do that? If we look at the process, and I introduced something which you called the 8P model in the Netherlands, which was developed by Nederland Boven Water, a think tank. And luckily, in the transformation, there are also 8 P's in English. So this really this is really helpful. I don't know how it will be in Chinese if we go there, if it's still the same. Which it states is there you have to focus on those P's. The first one is the persons. So who are the initiators? Well, it's the municipality, to be sure, and it's BPD as a developer who's going to build there. And then there are the principles, and they're already stated by me before. So this is something which we have to stick to. And then there's the panorama, which is also very helpful. So what will be the dot on the horizon? What's the reason, in my best English, reason d'etre? So why are we here? And that's, we want to build the healthiest urban neighborhood of the Netherlands here. That's our goal with this development. And I think maybe that's the reason also they asked me to come here and tell me about this project. What's the program? Well, then we said there are 600 dwellings we're going to make and commercial spaces. And then there's something on packages. So we say we have a solar powered, no gas neighborhood. And it's built around moving people by bike and by foot. So we started the whole area designing it to be reachable by bike and by foot and not by car. And then there within this, and most of the time the focus in projects is on project level, and also municipalities tend to have a lot of discussion and meaningful meanings on the project. So instead, I think it would be very good if the government would focus on those things. So what do you want to be and where do you want to go with your city, and not talk too much about the project. We, for instance, have a few projects within this program, 2 high-rise towers and also a skywalk, which is like a garden on the roof of multiple building blocks connected by bridges. So we're going to make a 360-meter long garden on a 5-story high building blocks. And in the end, you can talk about products, and we said it would be nice to have bio-based products and materials. In the end, and very important here, is also who are we going to build it for? So I discussed this like from top to bottom, like a Chinese approach, but I think you should really mix those pieces constantly in your planning of your new neighborhood. And we say we're going to build here for urbanites. It's a lecture apart, but urbanites are people who like to have this city buzz around them and who like to have a choice and be very independent, who like the dynamic of the city, but also the peace and the tranquility of a home. So we're really designing for those people to come and live in this neighborhood. This is also a pause slide so I can catch some breath and then go on. So the question was, what can the Chinese learn from the Dutch? And I'm really have the feeling that we just start learning in the Netherlands on transformation. There's so much going on. So I think our discipline has to transform to be able to do transformation the right way. And there are so many opportunities which we can reap at the moment. So I'm zooming out a little bit and try to make a sketch of what is going on in the urban field. Already told me I worked with AM, that's another development company, and I left there in 2011. I was a little bit on the outskirts of the urban development, and then I rejoined BPD like 5 years later. And 5 years, a lot of change can happen in 5 years. So it's like a bit of an outsider view on what happened to the discipline of urban development in the Netherlands. And I think I can elaborate on this the best by having those two subjects. Sustainability, which was like 5 to 10 years ago, a subject which was very broad, and it was like saving polar bears, switching out the light, but also having heat resilience in the city. So it was a concept which was not filled with a very detailed way of doing it. By now, sustainability, luckily, is here to stay. Every development company here in the Netherlands has something to say on sustainability in the way they do it in their projects. Now the new terminology which is coming around is on health or on well-being. It's really a new kid on the block. But I think this is the next big thing in real estate development, because it's very important. I think it's also here to stay. And if you look at it from how can you place this in a model, and this is the donut economy. And this is like really looking on the economy on a broad scale, but also on a project scale. So you can say we have an ecological ceiling, which we have to guard. So for sustainability, that's not where you can go beyond. But there's also the social foundation, which should be in order. And it's really helpful to have those criteria in setting up your projects. And it's a nice way on thinking on how you can do urban development. What would this mean for instance, us as developers? Well, 5 years ago, we did area development, and it was more or less like having a project management on a big scale. So you did a lot of houses, and then you called it area development. But nowadays, I called it Mares, Eres, Vares, and Fares. And if you say it very quickly, it sounds like Chinese. But what really means is, in all the urban plans I'm working on in the cities, mobility as a real estate service is something which is catching up. So like sharing cars and not providing people with houses, but also providing people with mobility options. The same goes for energy. There's, in this field, huge innovation leaps in how you can produce energy on the houses you are developing with solar panels, with wind. So there's also, I think, our new cities, our new neighborhoods will be the energy producers for the city in big. And it's very interesting to think how we can integrate this. Waste, there's also a lot of things to do on waste. And I thought 5 years ago, I will never be an expert on waste, for instance. It was something which was handled by another company. And it's coming more and more into our project as an integral part of the urban design. And lastly, also food is coming more into our project. So there's more a holistic approach, and I think there's a huge chance for us as developers and planners to learn how to do these kind of projects. Very interesting to see. It's a big adventure. It's also a big challenge, and I think it's also a huge responsibility, because I had this nice slide on Pakhuis de Zwijger, and in what kind of city do we want to live? And I think, in what kind of world do we want to live? And and they also don't like the word development here in Pakhuis de Zwijger. So let's not talk only about it, but also let's put our lessons into practice, and let's do and try new things. Because if you ask me how a healthy urban living, what it should look like, it should be, the process of transformation for me should be guided by the answer to the question, in what kind of world do we want to live? And that's really important to keep in mind. And also I think the same applies for the Chinese government and Chinese people. If you can answer this, hey, that's a really quick, thank you. I saw already a lot of things on water and rain and all those things. We already had it in our, and I think they should take it a step further and think on what kind of world do we want to live, and then that should be a really good guidance for your project. So back to the first slide. As a real estate developer, when I told friends I was a real estate developer and I came to birthday parties, and they said, "Oh, you're from a real estate developers." And before I know it, I was outside talking to the auto car dealer, and it wasn't really not a sexy topic. Nowadays, there's change going on, and nowadays, if I say I'm working with a real estate developer, I'm outside talking to the guys selling electrical cars, but at least there's a shift in the right direction. And I think if we can answer the question and find answers for ourselves in what kind of city do we want to live, it should be a city which creates living environments. And that's really a challenge we're up to the next coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeroen Hutte. I have one brief question, then I go to the audience. Of course, Brechtje said, okay, what they were so surprised about at the local design institute is all the workshops.
Yeah.
So, for example, for this military base that was not so cool as I pretended it to be, how many workshops do you have?
Well, actually, we as a process, we had something which we called a sprint. So we took. Now we are in the 4th sprint, just started now, 8 weeks. Yeah. Every 2 weeks with the local government sitting together, saying, what do we want to know, what do we deliver, share them with all the disciplines, work for 2 weeks, coming back, and after 8 weeks we do a final presentation in which the municipality says, we give a go. Yeah. Or so this was the plan, but it works more or less. So it's not like workshops, but it's continuity of sprints, working towards an end.
Okay, but that's the developer and the government talking together. But I believe the new thing was having the government, the developer, but also some outsiders and maybe some people who live there.
Yeah. Well,
discuss. Yeah.
Yeah. In this context, I have to be honest, there were talks before, and then we've really focused on working on the project. We also had contract negotiations, and we said we have to develop this, and after we finish round off the negotiations on the contract, we're going to talk to the neighborhood.
Yeah, so okay, so that's the next step.
That's the next step.
And then, Okay, let's see at questions. Yeah.
Well, it's a great question, I think. In what city do we want to live? Mm-hmm. In my own work, I also propagate that we should start with the normative questions first before developing technology, etc. So it's the first model is technocracy, so to say. It's which is the main thing in China, technocracy. Mm-hmm. But then, well, the problem starts, I would say. So we live in a pluriform democracy. We have all kinds of different ideas about in what city we want to live. Yeah. So how are you going to solve that, the pluriform conversation about and the ideas about how we want to live?
Yeah, of course, it's a very good question. And also when we talk about a healthy city, we have a lot of ambitions we would like to realize, and then you should do something on circularity. Yeah, okay, I should do something on circularity, and you should do something on heat stress, and you should. So the list of all the topics you have to tick is getting longer and longer, and there's only so much capacity, money, and time to develop a plan. So I would say just do it. Pick the ones you think suit the project best. And for instance, for this one, we said everybody should have a view on green. So we have made a computer model. Every dwelling can see the blue sky and a tree from their window. Yeah, would I have liked to do things on circularity? Yeah, for sure. But at least I'm doing.
But then the question may be, who decides?
Yeah,
who decides? So is it the urban planner who decides in what city do we want to live?
In this case, there was I would say we decided, but you saw no, because the government said it's really like more a concession, so it's put forward to the developer to decide how to build it. But you can do it only right once, so we put a lot of ambition also in this project, and what you see is that the policies on urban transformation really pick up pace. So we could learn from the policies and try to incorporate as much as we thought we could do in the limited time we had.
Okay, other question? Yeah. let's go to you.
Oh, okay. Here goes. You said that there's a switch in the perception of the profession as a developer, like the party example. And I was wondering if you would say that there's also a switch in the state of, like, in the profession itself, really? So the situation at the party changes?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, why do you think that is so? Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, do you understand the question? Is it only different at parties that people view you differently, or is it did your profession really change?
I think a profession really changes because there's more awareness for all the problems we face as a world and as a city, which are becoming more and more important, and which is why? That's a good question. I don't think it's only logically because there's really a sense in if we want to make this right and we have to, if you want to have a resilient city which is future proof, you can't just build and be away. So also demands from policies, but also the whole professionalization of the discipline is adding to this transformation. And sometimes it goes really fast, and sometimes it's really also dependent on context. But this transformation, it's also there's so much people next to your plot that you're obliged to do the best you can to develop. Otherwise, if you make a mess, you won't come back as a developer in the city. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you have a question, but yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, it might be a harsh question, but I recently read an article from MIT saying rethinking about sustainability has to be about rethink about colonialism, which is like I don't know anything about urban planning, I have to admit, but I can imagine, like, for the fact that most of the West European country can get clean air and clean city now because most of the dirty factory get outsourced to the rest of the world. So I wonder if you can reflect on that on your topic. Yeah.
Of all the questions I prepared, this wasn't one of them. But yes, of course, it's a topic, and yeah, in order to shape a better world, your field of control is very limited, and I think there should be a lot done by us reaping the benefits of being on the forefront of all those developments, and also being in the lucky position that we have all the riches to do so. But if I had the answer, I would share it with everyone right now, because I think it would be very good for the world. So I do my utter best in which is in my control, and I hope also by giving like these presentations, I give something to China, which is certainly not an underdeveloped country, but I think as a if we can learn from each other, we can climb the ladder to a better world faster.
Okay, I leave it at that. Thank you. Jeroen Hutte. You will come back at the panel at the end of the program. So there will be more opportunities to ask questions. Okay, now next we're going to see two cases in practice of Dutch designers working in a Chinese context. And the first presentation is given by someone I know quite well. We actually met in a very boring birthday party in Shanghai in 2009. It was, yeah, and started to talk, and this talk actually turned into a book a couple of years later. But anyway, he now started his own design firm, More Architecture, in Shanghai, and actually he's now working on founding a second office in Amsterdam. So that's the other way around, actually, as we're talking about. But he did many projects in China. He will talk about several of them, I suppose. Daan Roggeveen.
Thank you, Michiel. Well, thanks for turning out such a big number. That was a quite appropriate introduction, so I'll leave it to that. All right. Hey, wait, something.
That was the book.
No, this is the book. Ah, yeah. So this is what we. So this is full disclosure. This is what we did together, Michiel and me. We worked on this book for 2.5 years. This is research on urbanization in China and the transformation of cities in central and western China. After that, Michiel went to Amsterdam and I stayed in Shanghai. We stayed in touch. We started working on cities in Africa and all kinds of other stuff. And right now we run a lecture series at the Amsterdam Academy for Architecture together. I also recently presented this book also in Pakjes en Zwijgen actually, and this actually discusses how the Chinese city can be a model for urban development globally. So buy the book and read it because it's yeah, fantastic. Yeah, sorry, it was just blatant self-promotion. All right, so we're in an interesting moment in China. China's GDP growth is going down actually. Its government target is around 8%. We had a very high moment in GDP development around Olympics, and actually this is also the moment that I moved to China, 2008. Unrelated actually, and then it started to go down after I arrived, and at the same time, one of the things that started to happen was that the number of museums and museum construction started to go up. This is just a kind of illustration of the fact that cultural development is being part of urban development actually. And with our office, we're actually involved in this kind of development. We see that cultural program is part of urban development in all kinds of ways. This is a project we just finished in Jiaxing in Zhejiang province, 1 hour drive from Shanghai. It's a mixed-use project of 16,000 square meter, including a hotel, office space, conference center, 3 restaurants, and also a public square. Actually, at the heart of it is a public space that is kind of intimate, where people can meet, where people can, where kids can play, and so forth, where you can hang out. And it contains a gallery, and that gallery is a gallery for contemporary art that we also designed from the inside. So we worked on it's a kind of Guggenheim-esque staircase that goes up, and then it has a kind of lecture room on the that's is sitting on the top of it. The beauty of it is that we could control it completely, from master planning to architecture to to interior design, landscape design, furniture design. But also that let's say art is a kind of intricate part of this piece of the city that we could shape. Now we also do other stuff, including this, for example, this gallery in downtown Shanghai. So also here, a cultural project that is part of urban, let's say, the DNA of the city. When Michiel and me met in Shanghai, my weekends were kind of, basically spending time at boring birthday parties. And the last years that has changed dramatically because the cultural infrastructure of the city is very rich now. Because of these kind of places, actually. Now, another thing that we're currently working on is another art gallery that's also developed by a private client that tries to that is serving basically a very fast increasing culturally interested population. This is going to go under construction in May. All right. Today I want to talk about a project that we did together with Mars Architects, Neville Mars. Office based in Shanghai, and that we worked on between 2013 and 14. And it's a project called City is Museum. It's not in Shenzhen actually, but in Beijing. Interestingly, that Beijing is kind of the very strongly represented in the DNA of Shenzhen, because Shenzhen was when it was appointed as a special economic zone, a lot of urban planners and policymakers came from Beijing to Shenzhen, so somehow there is a strong sense of Beijingness in the DNA of the city. Okay, so this is Beijing in 2018. So we see a very big city here, and the airport is sitting here. And 798 is an art district that is kind of in the middle. This is Tiananmen, so we see the Forbidden City here. This is Norman Foster's airport, and then we are midway. And this is 2006. So here you see actually the airport under construction, and this is all kind of countryside. So we're at the fringe of the city. So that is basically what happens. In China now, this is so here this is all being developed now. 2018, this is being developed, east side, and here this is all kind of countryside. It's also another type of picture, but so it's trying to create my argument through flawed aerial pictures, basically. Okay, so this is the area, the highway to the airport, and this is the area that we are looking at, a former factory zone that kind of developed, that was developed in the 1950s in close collaboration with East German engineers. So they were designing these factories. They came into China to design these factories, and that led to this kind of urban environment, gigantic factory area that got where the state-owned factories started to close down from between the mid-90s and mid-2000s, so between 1995 and 2005, leading to step by step these places got inhabited by artists, first by the art academy actually, CAFA, and then by artists and also galleries. They started to use these former factory spaces as workshops, as places to produce art, but also to display art. Like, for example, this place, UCCA, one of the most prominent gallery spaces in Beijing, and in China for that matter. Now, this area has seen a lot of changes between, let's say, 2002 and 2013, when we started working there. Artistic tourism started to emerge, kind of industrial nostalgia, informality, meaning unplanned architecture, unplanned urban design, and kind of traffic issues. So the question was, how could this kind of this led to a point where mass tourism is really overwhelmingly putting pressure on this area. This is the lobby of the 798 District Art Hotel, kind of the emblematic for the situation in this zone. So we went from a factory zone that was created as a zone for industrial production in the 1950s and served as such until, let's say, 2005, to a place for artists, to a place for galleries, to a place for UCCA and other bigger institutions. Architecture studios moved in, and then mass tourism moved, started to emerge, so that pizza places and latte bars are prominent everywhere. You can pay with the Visa card. So the question is this really an alternative art zone, or is it just a tourist destination where tour groups arrive by touring car? And with all the traffic and noise and rubbish, and that is part of it. Now, the question is, what's next? So one of the key founders of that area, Huang Rui, a very prominent artist in China and actually a member of the Stars Group, came to us with the question, can you work with the owner, the 7-Star Group, the owner of the factory area, on a future strategy? And then the owner came to us, one of the representatives of the landlord, and they gave us, they handed us this sketch, meaning we want a design center, we want an exhibition center, exchange center, community center, and shopping and restaurants. And this is more or less the brief. And then we were so stupid to say, well, let's not follow the brief, but let's try and develop a kind of overall strategy, because this means that this transformation process of 798 is actually part of this, it's emblematic for how China is moving from made in China to design in China, from being a production powerhouse to an innovation-driven economy. So that means that we need a strategic vision. So then we started to do what we heard before. We started to invite a lot of people on the table, and we had a very good dinner actually. This is Huang Rui, this is Neville, and we started to organize a kickoff meeting with a lot of stakeholders, and with the representatives of the landlord, Mr. Lee, here. And then we tried to set up a process that was both research and strategic design to develop a future vision for 798 Art District. So first we we thought, well, if we have to develop a strategy, we first better write a book. So we became the guest chief editors of Urban China. Urban China, Shenzhen Zhongguo is actually the first and most prominent independent magazine for urban planning in China. And we started to work the way I used to work with Michiel, basically doing journalism, starting to interview the artists in the community that were part of that movement of the transformation of from factory to art district. And we started to ask them, how did that transformation actually happen? So first we started to look into history to understand the future. And that meant that we realized that what happened was a kind of process of gentrification, but with, this is a bit cheesy, but with Chinese characteristics. And that research, that journalistic research, actually debunked quite some myths about what we thought that happened in the district. First of all, we thought there were a massive amount of artists that moved in. Actually not true, there were only 12 people that moved in. And they were the guys who were making that whole transformation happen, actually. Then we thought that these guys were struggling, that they didn't have any money to work and so forth. Not true. Because the art market in China exploded dramatically between 2000 and 2010, these guys all got filthy rich. So somehow they maintained their profile of the struggling artist, but in the back, in their genes, they all had the platinum credit card, of course, and they would. And that's the third part. We thought, because the rents kind of exploded in that area, there's no artists anymore. Not true. There are still artists, and a lot of these people also kept their studio in the district to maintain that kind of image of the struggling artist, but at the same time they had a villa out a little bit further that they would go to with their Land Rover or something. So somehow that was very interesting to see that whole idea of the way we know gentrification worked completely different here. Then we started also comparing cities, looking at the comparison between, let's say, cities in the West and cities in China, in terms of, for example, number of museums. And then you see that the score of museums in China is way lower than, for example, global cities. And we also started to look at what is actually the experience that people have in 798. Why do they go there? And it turned out that for many people, 798 is really an urban experience, so they spend almost a day there, and public space is one of the key reasons they go. Not so much the exhibitions or the galleries, it's really like walking around and having a coffee and then enjoying public space. And that combined with the notion that in China, museums increase dramatically in size at this moment, we decided that the project should be called City is Museum. So the understanding this part of the city as one big museum kind of project. So that was the starting point of our design. And for the design, we actually decided to work with a relay process, meaning inviting a series of specialist experts and giving them the brief in relay, meaning first 2 teams work on it, then they give their results to the second team, and so forth. So we divided the
Dan, you have 2 more minutes.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
I
say this because I know you have 50 more slides.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So, but I'm going very fast now. Okay, so we divided the project in 4 themes, and then invited 8 teams to work on it. OMA and McKinsey on the business case, CAFA, the art school, and Hybrid Space Lab on the virtual, XML and Rockband Art Museum, one of the most prominent museums in Shanghai, on cultural content, and AIM and Y on future heritage. In relay, meaning that, and then after that we invited them to Beijing for a 3-day workshop to work on this future vision. Now, that was quite interesting because this mixture of different backgrounds led to a really diverse input in the process. McKinsey basically saying you should focus, and that can lead to money. OMA basically saying, well, you have all kinds of, let's say, scenarios for future development, and that can create different densities. Looking at the virtual side of development, looking at the balance between art and commerce, 798 as in a network of peers, and creating a gradient between, let's say, the art, and the other functions. So there's not a clash between those two, but it could be an integrated part. So art and commerce can be kind of art can kind of colonize hotels, apartments, offices, and so forth. And also art can bring in identity value to the commercial part, and the commercial part can bring in finance to the art. This is part of the work by XML. Rockwind Art Museum proposed to work not only on the financial and planning side, but also on the people side. So creating a board to guide that, and then add also a program to the mix that already existed. And finally, AIM and Y concluded that we should also take care of the heritage part of the because that is actually also the key of 798. All right, conclusions. Good. So we have a different type of gentrification in China. So creative clusters also develop very differently, and that means that you have to have another type of process to respond to that. For the strategy for 7 and 8, we decided that focus should be this world-class art district with a healthy mix of programs, and at the same time it should be managed by a board, so that there's a long-term view and there's also a selection of tenants, so you can create a high level of quality in the district. Density could be increased, but the spillover of that density increase, so the spillover of the real estate development should feed actually the creative quality. It might be necessary to put 1 or 2 new bigger institutions in the development, like UCCA, but also to create a network of incubators so that there's art production in the site itself actually, and that gradient that I talked about already can be supporting the integration of art into the other programs. And then finally, heritage of that site, that industrial heritage is a core quality of the site actually. It sounds like a very obvious conclusion, but that was actually a very important key conclusion. And finally, public space is the main carrier of the area. So hence, city is museum. And then regarding the process, this is a very process-oriented approach, meaning that we're actually very much cross-disciplinary and multinational, and that allowed us to break down barriers that were part of the process, part of the project. Sorry. So a lot of different observations and concerns by different people involved in the project, but very often compatible. So McKinsey and an artist could have the same opinion on the development of the district, or an architect and a museum director had the same kind of vision. Very interesting. And truly collaborative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. You went way over your time, so we can have one question. I only want to know, how did the local authorities react to when you presented them your plan that you made with so many different offices?
Yeah. Now I think that surprised, excited, and reluctant.
Okay, and do you know what happened? Because you did this in 2014.
Yeah. So the process was kind of halted because the stakeholder issue was still too complicated. One issue is that the area has a lot of subtenants. So the main landlord has rented out a lot of space to different tenants. So it's very difficult to control the whole thing. I think similar to the project that you just talked about, the whole. Yeah. So when you talk with different landlords, and everybody has also a different commercial agenda, and that makes it very complicated.
Okay, so it's just a difficult area to develop.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Is there one question for now, because Dan will come back in the panel as well, but one question about his presentation that somebody would like to ask? No? That's clear? Yeah? Okay, well, you'll come back. Thank you, Dan. Yeah. I promise you, we have a second case study. It will be presented actually by video, but it's brought to us by someone who was trained as an architecture historian, worked on several international projects, used to be the chief curator for the Netherlands Architecture Institute, and is now program director of the Shenzhen project at the International Newtown Institute in Almere. Please welcome Linda Vlasseroot. Yeah. I'll give you the mic. I already said you brought a video to us. Can you explain what are we going to see?
Well, this video was made for the Shenzhen Architecture Biennial, which opened in December last year. And we were invited by one of the sub-venues, which is based in Guangming Newtown, which is one of our research areas, to actually explain.
So Guangming Newtown is a part of Shenzhen in the north, right?
It's one district in the northern part, so the outer territories basically of Shenzhen. And we were invited to explain the process we had been going through as a consultant team, which is a very difficult process to put into an exhibition, and that's why we made this short video.
Yeah, so you're actually consulting the local authorities on redevelopment.
Yes, so it's a very big district since 2007, and they want to become a green city. I mean, that's part of the video, okay. But we organized several workshops, and what we've been doing is actually being as a consultant team, like a qualitative team here in the Dutch, because what the risk is of doing one workshop is that you go back home and then everybody says, well, thank you very much, we go back to business as usual. And by in sort of proposing this consultant team with coming back 3 to 4 times a year, we were actually trying to build up knowledge and capacity building, and therefore more sustainability in the advice we give.
Okay, so let's first look at the video and then we talk a little bit further. Thank you.
The International Newtown Institute, INTI for short, is a research institute based in the Netherlands. It studies new towns worldwide in order to improve global urban development. Guangming Newtown has been collaborating with INTI since 2015 to improve the overall quality of its urban development. Guangming Newtown covers an area of 156 square kilometers in the northwest of Shenzhen and currently has a population of about 1.2 million people. The goal is to become a green city.
In 2015, we were asked to set up a Dutch consultant team to actually supervise the urban planning development of certain large-scale districts.
The interesting thing about Guangming is that they kind of recognize that there is potential in this place to develop something which is different from other places in the periphery of this city. And that has to do, I think, with leadership, but it also has to do with the intrinsic qualities of the place.
It wants to become a green city, and it's struggling with how to do that. And it's really an integrated approach instead of just executing a list of projects.
The planning culture we see in China at the moment is a fairly top-down, from sort of state level across provincial level to local levels. It leads to a very efficient planning. At the same time, it leaves certain players out of the game. The public, I think, plays a much less important role than it does in many places in Western Europe.
Our goal is to not provide a design solution, but then to tell a narrative, tell a story, so that we want to get action.
So far, 4 workshops have taken place. In 2015, work started with giving advice on the upgrading of the industrial watch park. In the second workshop, the consultant team reviewed the Guangming Green Ring project design competition and offered advice to the winning team on how to move on. The implementation of the Sponge City program was subject of the third workshop. The consultant team reclassified the list of projects and proposed additional targets to reach a higher urban quality instead of only focusing on risk management. The last workshop was on green commuting. What steps should be taken in order to improve the current infrastructure network? Each 5-day workshop resulted in a clear-cut analysis of the problem, a systematic and strategic framework for future urban planning, and practical guidelines for steering and monitoring these developments.
At a strategic level, it's really a political process, and that's what we try to influence.
We're going there only for a very short period of time, so it's all a bit in a pressure cooker.
We sit down together with sometimes local experts to really go through the different questions we have.
So our role is much more that of a mentor, of an advisor, that actually tries to help people solving their own problems.
Your team, the Dutch team, already made a huge difference in terms of the green ambition of the Guangming Newtown. I was so impressed by every member of the team.
We cannot do the project ourselves. We need people locally on the ground that actually make the project happen.
And I think that also by providing guidelines, it's not just only a large theoretical question, but we really become practical and try to see how things can be done and actually be changed.
And the teamwork is so important. And it's not easy to integrate all the team members.
We collaboratively want to improve current conditions, and it's not just saying, okay, this is our label, it's more about what you can do as a collective. And that's what I think is also what is appealing to many who see us working, because that's the only thing that steers us.
Okay, thank you. Linda, please take the mic. Can you explain to us what exactly is your role in this setting up of the workshops? Is it mainly providing the workshops and letting people talk and moderating that, or does it go further than that?
It goes further than that because, I mean, we're actually hired by the Guangming Management Committee, and then they also have a new town center which steers the urban planning process of a very large area, and they are bumping into several problems. So what we do as INTI is actually try to look at what is the problem that they are facing. Then I select a team which is multidisciplinary, so many different disciplines, but a core team that comes there more often, so we have a lot of local knowledge. And then what we do, well, the first day is really getting into the whole issue, and then we mainly work as a Dutch team to give advice on what the problem is. So basically what the film already says, you know, what is your problem? And what we try to do is to prioritize, bring in hierarchy, coming up with guidelines, because that's most of the time everything is treated equally important. So we are there to put fingers on what we think should be improved or can be improved.
Yeah, but now we just heard at the introduction that Brechtje mentioned, okay, so normally in China the planning is very top down. It was also in the movie. And maybe there's an opportunity for a sort of a Dutch approach could be to influence that and to have more local discussions. Is that also your experience?
Yes, because what we see is that it is indeed a very top-down system with with very many different departments that hardly communicate with each other. So water is doing water and roads is doing roads. So what we experienced with coming with a multidisciplinary team, we had everybody at the table. And then the best thing to do is to get as informal as possible to actually really look at the different problems they are facing and then steer that conversation very profound. And that's what we bring in as a foreign team. And to give one example, we had this workshop on the Sponge City. And what we saw is that they had a list of 52 projects only focusing on risk and looking at water as a problem. While we said you can also, you know, from a Dutch perspective, you can actually see water which has added urban quality. And then you start reclassifying and bringing a whole different way of looking at the different projects. So it's also mirroring and reflecting. And just one other thing.
So that is more being the outsider. It's
the outsider. And the other thing is that what really is a problem to them is that there's a huge gap between what is being planned on paper and how to execute it. And that's the biggest struggle they are facing. So also in Guangming New Town, developments go very slow. Also because of leadership changes.
I'm actually surprised to hear that, because normally when you think of China, development goes very fast.
Well, there is a huge difference between downtown Shenzhen, which is the original special economic zone, and the area which is just outside. Because you see, there's a lot of competition between the different districts. I mean, Guangming New Town is not the only green city in Shenzhen. There are 3 other ones, basically. So it's very different or difficult for them how to profile themselves, how to bring in investment and people, because it's an hour drive to get there. So it's a different type of Shenzhen.
Yeah, and now this approach that you brought, doing these workshops, this integrated approach, as you said, do you have the feeling that that they will continue doing so on other projects as well, where you're not involved?
that is still very hard because what you see is that, of course, it's a 1 week process. You give advice to the leadership and also to the Guangming Urban Planning Department. What you see is that they really are looking for capacity building. And that's what we're trying to do in these workshops. But I was there 2 weeks ago to actually see, how can we upscale the collaboration? They need training. So in the last workshop, we proposed a bicycle expressway, and there's still people within, say, middle management who have no clue what you're talking about. So it's really about, we take little steps, and they are very eager for training opportunities, so that they want to come here to see all these examples, so that it's, that the collaboration becomes more close.
Yeah. Okay. Clear. Are there questions to Linda Vlasserot about this project? No, nobody has questions. Yeah, over there was a question, right? Oh, you don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering because you say you talk about training, but is there also a difference between, let's say, the urban planners from Guangming district and the central city? Because the central city is a metropole, right? Shenzhen, downtown Shenzhen is a very prominent city right now. So I assume that the district you're working in also has a lower level of maybe the urban planners and so forth. Is that the case, or do you see that it's just? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. I think in the schedule of Brechtje, of course, you have the Shenzhen government, but then we are working with Guangming, which is district level.
Yeah.
So of course, the Sponge City water management is something which is steered through Shenzhen central government. Yeah. But when you talk about the industrial watch park, for instance, that is something they can do by themselves. So you have different, it's also depending on the type of project. For instance, there's going to be a campus, a huge campus, 20,000 students, but that is something that is also orchestrated by the Shenzhen government. So you have different levels of being able to give advice.
Okay, yeah, so you have to pick your battles, let's say.
You have to be, strategically, we also, collaboratively, we try to see which projects can help them most and are needed by them most.
Okay, clearly. Thank you for now, Linda Vlasserot. Give her applause. She also will be in the panel. But before we go to the panel, today's program is, of course, about Dutch companies, in this case, urban design firms and architecture firms, being able to take chances and to go to China. Now, that is part of a bigger current. That is also stimulated by the Dutch government. So, and the next guest is himself not an architect, but an e-designer, I would call it. He's owner of the digital agency info.nl, but he's also member of the top team creative industry of the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate nowadays. And it's true, it's Economic Affairs and Climate. It's the same ministry somehow. Jan de Waal. There you go. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so we listened today to several examples of Dutch firms, Dutch design firms going to China and working on projects. How important is China for the Dutch creative industry as a whole?
Well, you introduced me quite correctly. And of course, we are looking to the entire creative industries. And one of the top sector's objectives is to increase, trade internationally. But the world is very, very big. So we kind of prioritized our focus areas. And China is one of those 3 focus areas. So quite important.
What are the other 2?
Well, we're looking at the near markets, which is our neighboring countries. And with that, it's Germany. And we have the United States.
Okay, so Germany, let's say maybe Belgium, United States.
Yes.
And,
it's kind of mixed between the cultural priority states from a Dutch perspective, as well as the economic priority countries.
Okay, and then if you look specifically to the design industry, how important then is China? It's a focus country. Why is China a focus country?
Well, of course, it's a huge country, also with huge opportunities. And I must say, I do respect all those cases over here, because China is not easy for companies to have a sustainable business. So what we do as top team is see how can we help Dutch companies, and not only the usual suspects or big companies, but also say mid-sized companies to take those steps and go abroad and help them become sustainable in abroad.
Okay, and how can you help?
Well, I think the biggest challenge we have, and I also heard from those cases, is doing the gap between contacts and contracts, because we do have lots of trade missions or other instruments from stimuleringsfonds, for example, but it usually gives you one contact, but that doesn't necessarily lead to a contract to earning money. Actually, that's quite hard in China. And it's already stated. It's not only because the private-public mix, but also we shouldn't forget that there is a fierce competition within public entities in China as well. So it's quite hard for you if you're a Dutch company, since international business is about trust, about relations. That takes time, 1, 2, 3 years. I think that's usually the case, at least. So, and we don't always have the means to invest that time of period.
Yeah, but then, so if, example, I don't know, I asked who wants to go to China to do business. I believe
Not
there
so
were
many,
some
actually.
hands. There were some hands, maybe not so many, but a lot for such a group, right?
Yeah.
If this was a percentage for the country as a whole, there would be many. So what does the Creative Industry Fund do to support people that are here and want to go to China?
Well, it's great of being a top sector because that gives you special attention from Dutch government. So what we try to do is bridge that gap between those contacts and contracts. We have great embassies all doing good work, but we really want to bridge the gap through, well, say at least 3 pillars. One of them is having local partners. That can be very important because they know how to do business, and so we kind of creating a format to involve local partners to do business, to collaborate. The second one is not, well, the way we used to do this is get a star architect and go abroad and say, this is Dutch design and this is how you do it. I don't think that's working anymore. It has been great in the 90s, but
okay,
not today.
Why not? Why doesn't it work anymore?
Because, of course, I think on all the, and I think also Jeroen put it quite well, it's all about the global challenges, especially in China, especially in second-tier China, by the way. All those districts competing to be the next Shanghai, and they're looking for a different angle. So I think it's important to, and that's actually our focus, to put forward solutions. We're not selling creative industries, we're selling architecture. We're selling solutions to their challenges, to their problems. And those challenges, I think we do have a great tradition in that in solving those problems.
Okay, so that was your second pillar. You had a third pillar, right?
Yeah, the third pillar is reciprocity. And that's, I think, the most important one, actually, because China is evolving so fast. Actually, not only China, also creative industries is evolving fast. It's not only the top agencies anymore that have a lot of foreign employees. So how can we work together to create solutions for those challenges? And those are not easy solutions. It's not one way to do it, and it's by working together. So, and it's not just for the showcasing. It's really actually how do you do it. So it's not only on business working together, but also government and science, and that's our focus actually.
Okay, so it's not providing solutions from the Netherlands to China in this case, but it's working together with teams. That's your focus.
Well, I think we had some great examples, and they all tell us the same, and that's what we as a top sector try to stimulate and creating instruments. So doing a pilot, for example, in Shenzhen or Chengdu, and of course having a government relation, being able to make a public-private connection is important in China as well, because it gives you an important endorsement. So that's the programs we currently started in China.
Okay, thank you for explaining to us the Creative Industries Fund for now. Jan de Waal. I have to keep it short because we have only 15 minutes left. I want to ask the speakers of today to set themselves behind this table. Yes, and there's going to be an extra speaker that you don't know yet. He is Marcus Appenzeller. Give him a warm applause. He's founder and director at MLA Plus. Brechtje, are you not going to join? Yeah, please. Please do. Yes, of course. We have all of them. So we have a top team now ourselves here. Okay, maybe to start with Marcus, because we didn't hear from you yet. You worked a lot in China. We were talking about reciprocity just now with Jan de Waal. It's not only about what we can bring to China, but maybe also what did you learn from China working there? What can we hear?
Well,
learn from the Chinese.
Actually, as a matter of fact, my whole career started in China. After graduating, my first project was in China. That's like 15 years ago. But so my kind of first work experience is actually kind of working there, kind of bringing things or thinking actually back into Europe. And what I see now is of course there is things to be criticized, and we also criticize them when we work in China. But there's also something which I somehow miss in the debate happening, especially in the Netherlands nowadays. And that's to do with, I think, with the relation between sort of society and sort of the role of the planner, and even more political leadership in city development, where I think you can criticize China for being a sort of top-down country, but at the same time, if you look, for example, at infrastructures that are implemented in cities, there's very bold decisions in actually making cities ultimately more sustainable. I mean, example of Shenzhen is, for me, is kind of striking. You know, when I came there was basically one metro line. Now there is, what do we have now, like 13 metro lines, and they keep just building those. Providing public infrastructure, providing infrastructure which not only talks about Shenzhen as a city, but connects actually the whole Pearl River Delta from Macau all the way to Hong Kong, which ultimately, and you can see that already now, makes this whole region of, I don't know, 160 million people function as one city. And that's something which in the debate in the Netherlands I sometimes miss, is this kind of, the mayor of Amsterdam is thinking about, Amsterdam, the mayor of Rotterdam is thinking about Rotterdam, and the government actually has no vision as to, what the Randstad in this case actually could be and what the potential is. And you can, as a matter of fact, you could solve a lot of problems which each city is experiencing individually by actually linking things up and discussing things in a much, much bigger scale.
Yeah.
So that's something you can, I think, learn from China.
Actually, we see the opposite happening here, because the Ministry of Urban Planning was,
yeah, exactly.
taken away,
I mean,
so
I think this is a big loss, that there is not really a sort of central steering role anymore of a government, which I think, and this comes back to leadership. There is kind of a weak political leadership when it comes to city planning. And yes, I'm a planner, I'm an architect, I'm educating at the same time, also a future planner. So I think it's important to listen to people, but at the same time, designing cities by committee only takes you that far. There's simply strategic decisions which are to be made, which you cannot do with sort of neighborhood committee discussions, which actually need deeper insight because they're very complex and they need just background knowledge which the average resident doesn't have. That doesn't mean you have to exclude them, but actually you have to still kind of make decisions. It does not preclude you from actually making a decision.
Yeah. So maybe last question for this point, because you made your point clear. Do you also take that point of view? Did you also take that from China in your personal work, in your personal discussions here? Do you bring somehow that kind of centralist view? And how does that look like?
I don't think it's a centralist view. It's just a view onto the role of planning and the role planning could play. And of course, and this is where the differences are.
Were you more aware of the role of planning could play?
I mean, you're constantly aware. If you work here, of course, this is kind of a completely different context. And yes, people are more involved. People are engaging more than they do in China. So you can actually see the differences, and you're also working, as a matter of fact, in different ways. And on one hand, we're kind of trying to actually involve people more in the process in China because we feel there's a deficit. At the same time, it's also something which I just now kind of criticized in a Dutch context, that there could be sort of more planning. So I think in the end it's finding that balance, and I think we don't have the balance here, as there is not a good balance in China.
Okay, Daan, do you agree? Is that also your experience?
I fully agree.
Okay, good.
Always.
Linda.
Yeah. No, I want to add one thing, and that is, so I totally agree with Marcus, but I also think that one element that I learned from China is actually kind of incorporating unpredictability in your design. And so we live in a time that is changing very quickly and very dramatically. In China, that's a given. You cannot predict what the world will look like next week or next month. So you cannot use, for example, we are, as architects in the 90s, trained as program-driven designers. So first you organize your program, and then you base your design on that, both for a building and a city. In China, stuff changes so quickly that you have to change incorporate change into your design. And that is something I think we should start doing in Holland as well, because actually stuff in Holland changes very dramatically as well, and we should prepare for that. So that's what we can learn.
Okay, Linda, something to add here? So we hear this this sort of planning, the role of planning, and having maybe again a ministry of planning here, planning unpredictability. What more can we learn?
I think my biggest, I mean, I've been working in China since 2005. I think what I find remarkable, of course, from the West, there's always this black and white image still of China. You know, you have the government and you have society. And what I've learned is that there are many shades of gray. So, for instance, not in Guangming New Town, but in Dalang neighborhood, you see that, you know, you have volunteers, NGOs, entrepreneurs, companies. There's a very much entrepreneurial spirit, and they all create the city. And they're all helping each other to provide social welfare together. And I was very surprised by that notion, because here we have lots of discussions about bottom up and top down. I mean, all these words and what do they exactly mean and how do they meet. And there you could see that there was much more fluid. So the amount of stakeholders that participate in city making was, to me, was an eye-opener.
Okay, so you say there's already a big amount of stakeholders participating in city making.
It has, especially in Shenzhen, I think it has grown tremendously in the last couple of years. I mean, you could see it happening basically, and of course, you work really on different projects, so you experience it more from first sight. Me, I'm more like a curator and researcher, but I've seen it, say, so on the social domain side. Yeah. It's surprising.
Okay, and now we're talking, of course, about the question: what then can we take from, let's say, a Dutch approach, or as a Dutch designer, and that could be useful in the Chinese context? We heard Brechtje mention a couple of things. Working together with local institutes. That's actually also what Linda does, and Dan also. What is your experience? What makes them want to have your view on the development?
Well, that is an interesting question, because actually let's say my experience is that the role of the foreign planner or the foreign architect coming in is reduced by on a yearly basis. On one hand, Chinese designers, their education improves dramatically, their quality of work improves dramatically. So the role of the idea that a foreign team brings something to China is I think that has a limited time frame, and so that also requires for us as a kind of international firm in China to rethink our position, and to also rethink where can we add value, actually, because Chinese architects and planners are very well educated and very smart and very forward thinking.
Okay, Marcus Appenzeller.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, Dan. I still think there is something which I think we, as Europeans, kind of including the Dutch, actually always underestimate, and that's sort of this incredible image that Europe has in the rest of the world. And I think that's still kind of, that's still something, when you talk to Chinese and you ask them, what's your favorite city? Strangely enough, you kind of get, the kind of typical ones you find on the sort of bucket list of travel, Paris, London, some weird places, which Heidelberg in Germany, and, so there is kind of this enormous power of the global image that we have, that they kind of link and associate with certain qualities that we kind of embody and that our way of city making embodies. And I think there is still very much a sort of this kind of constant search on how can we get actually sort of European qualities and the Chinese sort of conditions. And I think it's not so much about kind of us bringing kind of solutions there, but it's us bringing kind of together with them, thinking about how certain sort of intrinsic qualities of the European city model somehow could also kind of play a role in these Asian cities that we see in China and other countries.
Yeah. Okay, Jeroen, so there comes in the role of the developer also. So do you ever ask yourself what makes a European city so popular in other parts of the world? As an example, is that something that you're aware of when you're developing?
I was just thinking of what makes us different, and then I came back to the remark on we have a very old city. It's 12 years old, you know, and what makes our city so unique, I think, is the whole history and the respect with which we use this history to build on top of historical layers, new places, and keep also other places which are very valuable to us. And yeah, so I think that's something, because we have such a long tradition, and also living in a delta, which is of our Dutch context, which is something we can bring to them. But I agree, in a few years things go so fast. I think we have Pakhuis de Zwijger in China, and
Well,
then,
you know, I don't totally agree with what you said. It's kind of this. It's kind of the age, and that it's an old city. I think that's not what it really is. I think it's the sort of the way we make cities, even nowadays, that actually sort of make them kind of shine compared to others. But at the same time, there is exactly that risk that we see some forces coming to the European context, you know, this being international investment, Amsterdam growing kind of much faster than it ever did in the past.
Tourism, not to forget here.
Tourism, yeah, all these effects that actually put our model to the test. And I think in that way you can also learn something back from China, because they're just dealing and operating on a much bigger scale, you know, and the one or the other approach from there actually would be quite suitable, still doing the way we do cities, but actually adding, you know, kind of bringing them to a new and a different kind of scale level.
Linda, I believe it was you that mentioned that you met several urban planners that want to come to Europe to get training. What are they looking for?
We don't know yet.
They don't know yet. No, I think they are. Well, they are. I mean, the most practical example was that we proposed a bicycle expressway, because we thought that would be a valuable contribution to the green commuting. But then half of them had no clue what a bicycle expressway looked like or what it could be. That's just one example. But we know, I mean, in terms of water management, urban heritage, urban transformation, bicycling, all these different issues, it's opening up their window, and that's how they actually say it like that. We want to open our window to the world and see what's happening elsewhere, and see how we can use that here. And that for them, thinking, for instance, in a system, as like we use the water as a system, that you have different projects adding to urban quality, that to them is something. It just look at projects and they execute it one by one. So this larger framework of how you can set priorities, how you can organize your phasing, how you can do short term and long, all of that is not part of their repertoire yet. So it's more about the way you do things, and how you can set guidelines, how you steer that. How do you steer guideline? I mean, how can you supervise this? So also 2 weeks ago, they're really looking at the Shenzhen level on advisory, on like what we have in sort of a governmental architect, but then of course in a different way. How can you steer quality? How do you do that? And that's what they want to know.
Now, I believe it was Jeroen Hutte who said, okay, so we should ask ourselves, what kind of city do we want? And somehow this is a worldwide, what kind of world do we want? You made it. Somehow a lot of these issues are international issues of big metropoles. I mean, congestion is a worldwide problem, right? Maybe sustainability is as well. Do you see internationalization? So maybe it's not Dutch architecture firms that work there, but it's just that it's going to be an internationalization of the field of urban developer. Is that what we were looking at? Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting that there's all kinds of hidden agendas below this. We worked on a plan in Ghana together, Marcus and me and a couple of other firms. And this is interestingly a couple of solutions we developed for Ghana. Actually, I think would be very suitable, for example, for Amsterdam.
Okay, name one.
Yeah, the fact that you can develop a framework where you have the infrastructure implemented top down. But then the plots you organize them very small.
Bottom up, yeah,
and bottom up, and that mixture of strong top down and free bottom up. That was, I mean, that would be like powerful here.
Yeah.
Just an example, but.
I think to me the key word in the end is, and when it comes to kind of this kind of scale jump is complexity, and especially when you talk about regeneration, because all by a sudden what used to be simple to build in the first place kind of becomes a lot more complex if some things stay, other things come, things change, ownership patterns are different, etc. And I think that's what actually the Chinese planning system is really struggling with, because that's not what it's been set up for. At the same time, that's something in Europe which, because we have a much bigger history in a way at dealing with that complexity, we're actually having a much easier time kind of organizing. So what Linda describes, that they're kind of this prioritizing story and kind of knowing how to steer with guidelines, all this kind of is a lot more complex than just kind of setting a strict rule which says, okay, you can build here, you can build here, you're not allowed to build, and this is how high you can build. So whenever we come up with this, then you're kind of entering that zone of complexity which needs a lot more education and a lot more knowledge to actually judge as to whether a solution is good or bad. And I think this is certainly something where we can also still contribute a lot to the debate. Whether that's in China, I see the same in Russia. We're not even talking about Africa yet. So
maybe I'm wondering, because that's a question to you.
Talk a little bit closer to your mic.
We have this system of urban planning which works very well. But if I look to the scale of those projects, it's like in the millions. It's 10, 100 times the size of all the projects we do here. I'm working on this 600 dwelling development. It's a big one for BPD, which is the biggest developer of the whole Netherlands. So can we be more sensitive, because the scale is so much smaller than the scale China has? Do our tools work on a project which is 100 times in size? I don't know, but you can say these are our lessons, but if the skill and the context is such more broader, then
I think of course you have to be a bit less. You have to be a bit less detailed, but at the same time, across the border from Shenzhen, there's an example that you can do urbanism to a whole different complexity level within the same kind of system, which is Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that there is, and also in Shenzhen they look at the Hong Kong model, of course. So I mean, there is cities which have somehow embodied a lot more this sort of European thinking about cities and qualities in cities than Shenzhen has so far, and so there is still some way to go, I think, in China.
Yeah, and you should not forget the fact that even though it's large planning, you still need small-scale planning too, and that's of course when you talk about the last mile, for instance, or any other subjects, they are very much struggling specifically on the details and how things are being connected.
And the street, the street is basically the same size as it is here, only the buildings are like 5 times or 10 times as high. So yeah.
Okay, there's a question.
Sorry, I really have a burning question. Architects and urban planners sometimes have a tendency to translate each challenge to a spatial solution. Now, the challenge you just present, I mean, on mobility, there's quite a lot of digital side to it as well, or an industrial side. Do you see also collaboration in that side in China?
Who knows? Yeah, Brechtje, do you know?
So on different.
So the solutions for traffic jams can be technical as well. Do you see solutions?
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
No, so for example, the Mobike, what is already operable in Rotterdam, right, and is the solution, of course, to mobility issues. That is that's digital, and these guys are now also going into car sharing. So this is bike sharing, and it becomes also car sharing. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, of course, traffic jam analysis through data. That's happening in Amsterdam, but it's also happening in China. And the advantage of China is that you don't have these privacy issues, so you can just analyze any data you want. And the biggest players in data and mobile are also have strong ties to the government. So that means you can move those innovations forward massively. So I think.
But do you collectively approach that challenges?
Who's you?
You as urban planners, in terms of other disciplines on a higher level. I mean, you talk about complexity in your own discipline.
No, not. I think. I mean, it starts off with the whole discussion around informality. If you look at Chinese cities, I mean, Dutch cities don't have any informal economic activities. So this is where it starts. Do you make room for informal business activity? And kind of you lived in a compound. I mean, the amount of informal activity that emerges around the entrance gate is just, it's kind of mind blowing. There's kind of, we're talking about pop-up restaurants. This is kind of, we haven't invented it. There's kind
Where
of
you can
Chinese
pay
have
with
this.
your mobile phone, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's for sure. And then of course there's also, there's also apps for God knows what in China, which have an impact on what we're doing. For example, recently I saw they showed me there is kind of an app now which you cannot put on your mobile phone. You kind of keep in your pocket when you in your car drive around, and there is kind of a pothole in the street. Then that kind of the app actually registers these kind of things and actually transfers information back to the government with which they can better maintain the roads. So they don't need people for these kind of things anymore. So they are a lot more inventive than we think. WhatsApp is another thing. We think WhatsApp is kind of great. I mean, if you know WeChat, it's kind of WhatsApp is kind of just basically there's one function of
okay. I have the feeling that we're moving towards another program, but
we're getting it becomes much more. It becomes more and more kind of an issue in developing projects, and especially when you talk about the urban scale. That's certainly the case.
Yeah, but I believe your question was: do you do this together with maybe there's Dutch companies, of course?
We don't do it. We don't do it yet, but we're trying to solve the problem. So this mobike you referred to, this bike sharing. I mean, in Shenzhen, that's become a big problem because there's just not enough space to park the bicycles. So this is where you kind of immediately kind of focus with, the sort of impact of technology on cities, and I think we have to do that more, certainly.
Okay, we're past 10 o'clock, so everyone is wanting to go to either the toilet or the bar, and maybe both. I'm looking at the audience because it would be nice if we have one last question from the audience. Who has a burning question that thinks that we cannot finish this evening without? Who has a good question? Yes. Well, yeah, I already asked that. I believe. Or the biggest thing in general, just anyway. I don't know if someone has
your
an
kitchen. Yeah.
What?
No. Better food.
But on urban design, I already asked that. It was the first question, I think. There's another one.
Well, maybe something on in large of how let's say like in continuation of what Jan said. How much of your work is driven by the demand from China, and how much is driven by something you created? Do you create the demand, or is it still demand driven?
Yes. Okay. Good question. Daan.
I don't know.
It reminds me also of John de Water. You remember? They always says China. You don't change China, but China changes you. Right? So how much is you can bring products, or is it your innovation bringing to China, and how much?
Yeah, well, I don't know, because I spent the majority of my professional life in China. So I don't know. It's basically where I yeah, maybe, but we developed the solutions there for there. And so yeah, apparently, I mean, our clients hire us, so apparently there's demand. Yeah, that's my question. Yeah, the market decides in that sense.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's we try to balance it, because it's, I mean, obviously there is a client who pays us to come there and do our work, but it's also the whole idea or the framework comes from us. So and of course it took several years in order to prove ourselves and also to see, what is the added value, and now we try to balance and see also how it can grow. So but yeah, of course it is figuring out where does your own agenda lies and where's the other one, but so far so good.
Marcos?
Does China change you? Yeah, I think it does actually. It does in a way that you kind of start realizing that everything by definition is different than you think it is, because it looks in a certain way. So we should, I mean, the example you gave with this artist, I think to me is kind of is a good one. That you kind of think they kind of there must be poor artists which don't have money. These kind of things. Same when we talk, kind of getting back to the creative industries. When we talk about creative industries, they're in China. They're functioning completely different. I mean, they're basically an industry. They're not like small scale offices typically, but they're kind of big, global investment firm backed tech giants that we often face in all sectors of the creative industry. So in that sense, I think that's something I always take with me. Look at it, kind of get us, kind of try to really understand what's going on, and not only what you think your Western preconception kind of tells you it is.
Okay, I think that's a nice monologue to end today, because we do have to. There's enough to talk about, but we can do that at the third part of the program downstairs in the bar, because I suppose you all hang around if people have questions. Can I thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today in the program, and give them a warm applause. Daan Roggeveen, Jeroen Hutte, Linda Vlasserood, Brechtje Spreeuwers, Marcus Appenzeller, and Jan de Waal, of course.